right. And sync. Sync. When I studied screenwriting in college, a professor made a really great point about the movie Fargo. Fargo perfectly fits the stereotypical three-act structure, with one key exception. The hero of the story is the antagonist. Think about it for a second. The film spends a half hour with William H. Macy, Steve Buscemi, and Peter Stormare's characters. We see Macy's plan to kidnap his wife go in motion. Then we see how Buscemi and Stormare kidnap Macy's wife and how it all goes wrong. The conflict of the movie is whether or not Macy's plan will work. But as things slowly unravel for our protagonists, it becomes more complicated. And the whole while, mostly separate from the rest of that plot, there's Marge, the heavily pregnant police detective, slowly getting closer to uncovering who shot two random people in the road.
So we got a trooper pull someone over, we got a shooting, these folks drive by, there's a high-speed pursuit, ends here, and then this execution type deal.
Functionally, she's the antagonist, but she's also the hero of the story. The only good and ethical person in the whole film, whose only arc is to see past her inherent trust in people, to recognize sometimes someone's lying to her.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, like I told you, we haven't had any vehicles go missing.
Okay. Are you sure?
It's thanks to her that Macy goes on the run and the criminals get captured. Though, of course, not before Buscemi gets ground up in that wood chipper. that still happens, and nothing is done to stop that. But again, she's not the hero of the story. She doesn't even show up till 30 minutes into the film, and is so disconnected from everything else that she almost seems superfluous at some point, especially early on. But she overtakes the story. You sympathize with her once she shows up. What happens before is a backdrop upon which she can act. And this is what sets her apart from the protagonists, those who we follow for the majority of the story, those whose actions drive conflict. One reason Fargo feels so distinct is it does follow that structure of the detective story, just inverted. We know who committed the crime from the start, and the conflict that drives everything is how the detective will catch the criminal, but we're following the criminal, and the detective is closing in on them. Tension derives not from how Marge will solve everything, but how will Macy's plan unravel in front of him. Key moments in the plot include when Macy's father-in-law gets shot up by Buscemi, showing the plan is outside his control. That's at the midpoint of the film, a point where the film kind of inverts and shifts focus. That's not Marge doing anything, it's the protagonists and their plan, their conflict, their issues. Marge just interlopes. But this is all part of the how catch 'em. That's to say, the inverted detective story. You see, unlike a whodunit, where we have to figure out who did the crime, a how catch 'em is where we figure out how does the detective catch the criminal. I know, very elaborate naming conventions, let's proceed. It's where the criminal is the protagonist, and the detective is the antagonist. And I really like these kinds of stories. They're very interesting to me because, as always, there is a right and a wrong way to do this with the structure. And to prove this, we're going to take a few case studies.
Were you a witness to what he just did?
Yes, I am, sir.
Witness to what?
You just incriminated yourself, sir.
I think one of the greatest examples of a heroic antagonist is the long-running TV show Columbo. Arguably one of the most consistently good How Catch 'Em stories around. Each episode follows a very similar structure. A criminal commits the murder, we see their motivation as to why they did the crime, we see how they did it, we see what leads to them, and often we get a sense of maybe the ethics of the criminal. We see the short-sightedness, the greed, the self-aggrandizing, but we also maybe see the vulnerability, the pain. What leads someone to commit a crime can be sometimes selfish, or it could be the last step of a long series of dominoes going down. If we sympathize, we may actually be rooting for the criminal to get away with everything. But there's usually a loophole, something that happens that doesn't quite go according to plan, that leads to us knowing there's a thread a detective can pull to unravel everything. Enter Columbo. Much like Marge in Fargo, he often shows up at the second act. We seldom see the picture from his perspective entirely, meaning we don't really know how much he actually knows about the conflict. He usually seems to hyperfixate on a small detail. In an ordinary whodunit, though, this might feel like a clue. But in a How Catch 'Em, we know these details are the threads Columbo can unravel to pull the whole thing apart. But how does he figure out who did it based on a couple small clues? Well, that's what the episode's conflict really is. Because we know who did it and how it was done, we, the audience, recognize that any small hint he pulls at is a sign the perfectly laid plans of our protagonist is coming undone. And the conflict then becomes, how does the protagonist still get away with the crime? Can they get away with it? Well, we know he won't, but how could he? But the reason Columbo works is Columbo. He's such a charming, lovely character who seemingly stumbles into answers during his investigation, but you always know he knows what he's doing.
If I hadn't taken that camera, you were counting on that. You didn't accidentally reverse that film. You did that deliberately.
It's partially an act, partially his personality, but you recognize the intelligence, especially when it all comes together, of how everything he's done has been to catch the criminal. And often, we might not even see the full scope of how he figured it all out until the end. We don't see his full logic until the credits roll. It also allows the show to constantly feel fresh, because every story is its own individualized narrative. When the show was brought back during the 80s, some episodes of Columbo placed Columbo as the protagonist of an episode, and these episodes lack the tension present in the original run, because we never had a doubt that Columbo would solve the crime. The tension came from whether or not the criminal would get away with it. The format allows the show to remain fresh and interesting from start to finish because we have a new protagonist every episode, a new perspective to watch the series from. And as a result, the emotionality, the tension, the dramatic ethos, it can shift from episode to episode. We just put a new conflict in, and Columbo pushes against the rest. As the antagonist, Columbo does not need to change and evolve over the course of the show. He is a constant, a stagnant. And as a result, we can put whoever we want up against him. He's a machine, and we get to see how this machine gets to the point of everything.
I observe the facts without biases of the head or heart. I determine the ark's path, stroll leisurely to its terminus, and the truth falls at my feet.
This structure also lends itself well to the original film Knives Out. The film was framed by many as a deconstruction of the typical cozy mystery story you'd see in an Agatha Christie novel. But this story screams Columbo all over it, with one twist. The protagonist thinks she's the killer. If Columbo's structure was about focusing on a criminal who we sympathize or maybe understand in a tight spot, Knives Out takes that further. What if our protagonist was innocent but didn't know it yet? And what would happen then if the detective kept pushing to get them brought to justice for a crime we later find out she didn't really commit, or at least maybe a misunderstanding that leads to a fatality. Ana de Armas as Martha is a sympathetic protagonist throughout the whole movie, being the nurse to the elderly Harlan Thrombey, a rich murder mystery author, typical, who becomes the subject of his own murder mystery after a mishap with his medication. Now, at the start of the film, we think, and Marta thinks, that she administered a lethal dose of painkiller to Harlan. And Harlan, sympathizing with Marta, guides Marta on how she can get away with murder. He understands it was an accident and doesn't want Marta's life ruined over a silly accident. One, of course, that ends in a fatality, but who's counting? And because Harlan's a murder mystery writer, he has a perspective on what threads might be used to unravel the whole case. And so he comes up with a spectacular way for Marta to get away with his own murder. A bit of a subversion there. And we are already in the mindset that there are threads that can be unraveled from this perspective. Because we're familiar with the conventions of the murder mystery, we are aware that a good detective can solve the whole thing. And we find out Marta committed the crime after the murder's already been established. It's a bit of an alteration in the structure. We don't start with the murder is really what starts Act 2. Even though the murder happens at the beginning, the secrets as to how the murder was committed are revealed early on to get us sympathetic to Marta, as well as see the antagonist of the film, the detective, is hot on her heels, and give us reason to realize Marta, who is innocent in our eyes, and innocent as proven later, is in danger.
Who is that guy? And why are we doing all this?
Enter Daniel Craig's
Benoit Blanc.
Benoit Blanc.
Well, Blanc.
Yes.
Which is such a great name for a detective. He's investigating the killing, but we later know from the start that he knows Marta was involved from the beginning. Because Marta, for all her work, forgot one thing. There's blood spatter on her shoes. As a result, the detective knows right away she did it because his blood's on her body. But she realizes there's more to it than simply that. But we only know that at the end. Benoit knows there's something else going on. And so he investigates further to get to the bottom of it. He knows there's holes in the story, and it's not so simple as just, oh, Marta has blood on her body, therefore she did it. It's a little more complicated than that, and he recognizes that. But we don't know he recognizes that until the film wraps up. As a result, most of the film is Marta trying to quickly scrub any evidence left behind, while Detective Benoit pulls at it. But there's a third party here that's very important to mention. Chris Evans' Ransom character, who we later learn switched his father's medicine with the painkiller in an attempt to have him killed. But then Marta accidentally undermined the plan because she recognizes the weight of the medicine in each syringe so well, without looking, she could tell which one was the actual syringe. Which means that she actually gave Harlan the correct medication.
Because you are a good nurse.
Which meant Harlan killed himself needlessly to avoid any of that happening, which is very, very funny and a nice subversion of expectations even further. I mean, it's not funny, it's ironic, but you get what I'm trying to say. So structurally, there is no murder. It was just, self-termination, one might say. We have two morally justified characters and one immoral one, and Ransom is the immoral one.
You can't be serious.
Ransom helps Marta halfway through the film, but this is ultimately done so Marta can take the fall for Ransom's crime, even though Ransom's crime ended up not happening because Marta subverted it from the beginning. But they don't know that. Evan's character is the true antagonist to the whole story, but we don't realize that till later on. Though we can probably piece together on our own based on evidence provided through the plot itself. And therefore, functionally, Benoit is the antagonist to Marta, even though ultimately he's responsible for exposing the real culprit of the crime. So he's the antagonist for a piece of the film before it subverts itself again and inverts itself to a traditional whodunit model of mystery. It starts as a how catch 'em, but becomes a whodunit, and as a result, the nature of who the protagonist and who the antagonist is switched quickly, creating the impression of subversion when actually it's, as Benoit says, a donut with a donut within it.
It is not a donut hole, but a smaller donut with its own hole. And our donut is not a hole at all.
Again, Benoit is ultimately a force of good pushing against the whole situation, and justice is done by the end. He is the antagonist, but he's a good person. And because we actually see justice done for the character we most sympathize with, that being Marta, it ultimately feels very cathartic watching. There is no sense of dour negativity. Sometimes with Columbo, there'd be characters who would be arrested who we actually kind of liked. Some people who committed the murder we kind of sympathize with. I think a good example of that would be Donald Pleasance's character in the original Columbo run. He's very sympathetic in that initial series, so we kind of feel bad when things go wrong for him. With Marta, because her ending is happy and optimistic, we actually leave the theater feeling very good about the whole thing. Even though the detective is the antagonist, there's no ill will between them, especially at the end when everyone gets what they want. Well, at least all the people we like get what they want anyway. But not every story pulls the structure off well, and sadly, one of those that I think actually fumbles it significantly is Death Note.
What do we want? Weed. When do we want it? Weed. Already said that. What do we want? Weed. I'm confused.
Yeah, Death Note, one of the most popular shonen anime of all time. I think it pulls the whole heroic antagonist thing off well for a bit, and then doesn't. If you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about, but let's run through it anyway just in case. For those who don't know, Death Note is about Light Yagami, a young man who discovers a Death Note, a mysterious little item that when you write someone's name in it, that person dies, and so he uses it to destroy all the criminals in the world. Sounds like a good guy, right? Except he's a maniacal maniac whose ego drives him to do worse and worse things over time, and also he's only killing criminals who he knows about, so that's like criminals who've already been caught. Like, what actually is Light accomplishing here? It's a good ego trip saying, I killed all the bad guys in the world, but like, if they're already caught, they weren't really doing anything bad anyway. How about you solve some mysteries that haven't been solved yet? That'll get some criminals off the street, but again, it's that kind of all or nothing approach, and he takes a single blanket solution to all problems, and we don't really understand if, like, he's executing, like, you know, mass murderers or if he's executing like jaywalkers. You know, where's the line drawn? In a way, I guess you can say it's arguably a satire of Japan's actual legal system, where as a 99% like conviction rate, even though, you know, I don't think all the people are guilty. If you're arrested in Japan, you're probably going to jail. And so I think with Light, it's that all or nothing approach that's similar to the Japanese justice system. I don't know if that's deliberate or a reflection of society in Japan. Who knows? Is it a satire? Is it incidental? I couldn't really tell you, and for the intents that we're having right now, it's not super relevant. I just felt like going on a diatribe for a second. So Light Yagami is the main protagonist of Death Note, but he's not the story's hero. Remember, he's killing people in mass. He's not a good guy. But I also don't know if I'd say that L is a hero either. He's ruthless in his pursuit of answers and takes extremes that get people hurt. But he does it for the intention of being a murderer to justice. One of the smartest things that L does is we don't really see him until several episodes in, allowing him to be established as this ethereal, larger-than-life figure. But much like Columbo, he turns out to be this kind of weird, idiosyncratic, eccentric guy.
You see, if I were to sit normally, my deductive skills would immediately be reduced by roughly 40%.
His efforts to uncover answers can seem like foolishness at first, until you see the method behind the madness. And L and Light become almost evenly matched in some ways. And we follow each character's line of thought and reasoning for their actions, trying to eke out small amounts of details in casual conversations. It becomes a masterful game of chess. I think the best bit is actually L's introduction, which is the second episode of the series, where he manages to trick Light into using the Death Note to kill a stand-in for L, who happens to be a condemned criminal on live television. So what he does is he broadcasts it in a very specific location of Japan where he believes Kira is.
Although this was announced as a worldwide broadcast, we are only broadcasting in the Kanto region of Japan.
He proves that Kira is in this location in Japan. He proves that Kira can kill without any physical means in person, and that he can kill remotely, which is very important because it helps establish those limitations of Light's powers. It helps establish where Light is. And it's all based on clever assumptions and clever guesswork based on stuff that we already saw available in the first episode. And he exploits Kira's pride to get there. He insults him across national television, knowing Kira would be watching TV at this time, knowing when roughly Kira would be operational. He figures out Kira's a student, for example, based on the time slots when people are killed. It's all quite clever stuff. And with those first 3 episodes, L is setting the foundation for his case, while other people are more directly involved with Light. These are smaller investigators Light deals with directly, who come very close to catching Kira, but not as close as L. And their investigations aid L in his own investigation as he forms a task force. One of the members being, of course, Light's father, which is all levels of ironic there. But once they meet in person, once Light and L meet in person, the dynamic shifts. It becomes very direct, very confrontational, and it begins to lead to something that goes wrong. Because even though these encounters are incredible, things immediately start happening that undermine the interestingness of these conflicts. We learn pretty early on that L absolutely thinks Light Yagami is Kira, but the trick is, how can L prove it? How can L prove Light is Kira? Well, it's tough. And to subvert expectations further, Light undergoes this massive scheme that involves wiping both his memory and the memory of his associate niece Amane temporarily, while setting up Kiyosuke Higuchi, an executive who uses the Death Note as well to further his own business ventures, as Kira. And this is done to throw L off the case, off Light's trail, so to speak. It also leads to a story that shows us that if Light were to never find the Death Note and become Kira, he and L could probably be friends. It helps add this dramatic tension in play, which is good, or maybe more than friends. I mean, you spell Yagami's name backwards, you get, you know what I'm saying? That's like an old middle school joke, I guess. You see what I'm saying, though? This is an interesting little subplot in the show. It helps establish there's a closeness to these two characters. But in our discussion, it also muddies the waters a lot. You see, Light is the protagonist, but now, in this arc, it's like we're following a different character. So who do we follow? Who is the protagonist of this arc? Well, it's still Light, but it's a different version of Light. Everything we've seen up to this point isn't relevant because Light has amnesia. Temporarily, yes, but it's still, he's a pawn to his own plan. And it's weird. So we know El is going to follow the thread, but we watch mainly as El, who's this brilliant guy, is scrambling for information to kind of piece everything together. He's still the same El. He still pursues Light and Kira, but Light's different. And so we don't feel sympathetic towards Light in this time because we know he's a pawn, and we know it's all part of a big scheme. And so we're not following anyone we actually like, and we know El is being thrown for a loop. And you see the problem, it throws the whole rhythm of the show off at this point. But it's still good because we're still directing our attentions towards a new antagonist, a new Kira who they didn't have to catch together. Even though we know it's all going to lead to Light having some plan that goes all according to plan, or according to some meme, I guess we can pull it up on the screen right now. We know it's something going on here, and it throws you off. It throws off the chess game that we've come to enjoy up until this point. Still, it's a clever moment for Light because this ruse allows him to throw El off just briefly enough, to make him doubt what's going on in front of him long enough for Light to take the Death Note and kill El. And it's here where I have problems, because Death Note keeps going after El dies, for a long time. See, there are other stories out there where the antagonist is a hero, working against the villain protagonist. We've already seen a few, but there's also Invader Zim with Zim and Dib, or Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks' character. Hell, there's The Prestige, where there's two rival magicians. But here's the problem. You know what these all have in common with each other? The two rivals are rivals from start to finish. I think Les Miserables is a good example of this too, because we watch how Jean Valjean is pursued by Javert across all of France for decades, and it ends shortly after Javert ends his own life. But with Death Note, we have this rivalry that is the backbone of your whole story, and that rivalry ends halfway through the manga. The anime did a good sense to truncate the second half of the manga, so it's now like a third of the anime. But when Death Note was debuting, a lot of people just felt the series ran out of steam at this point. Nier and Mello become the new detectives investigating the Kira case, and it just feels like they're replacements. You know, and look, I get it, manga has arcs, right? The Frieza arc in Dragon Ball Z. Frieza's not the big bad of Dragon Ball. He has an arc, and then that's pretty much it. And he wasn't the entire antagonist throughout, but without Frieza, you don't have the same problem because Frieza is an antagonist, a pure villain. He's not the rival like Vegeta is. Vegeta and Goku's rivalry drives the story. But with El and Light, they are enemies, but they're also rivals. They are equally matched. And so when you lose that rivalry driving the narrative, it's thrown off base. You lose something fundamental that drives conflict. And Light gets far less interesting. He's just the bad guy now. There's no chess match. There's not a single person who can totally match him. The second half of the story is just Light cleaning up shop with everyone left who is a problem for him. It feels he has God mode on. And Nier especially is frustrating because Nier is basically discount El. Mello's alright, Mello has some good bits, but he's no replacement, really. Even Misa Amane, who worked with Light, is de-emphasized. So it feels like everyone interesting is removed. And by the way, let me know if you want me to talk about Misa Amane at some point, because that's a whole other discussion right there. Light's father gets killed off. It feels like every interesting thread is tied up and cut away early. It just feels like the world falls apart without this central rivalry. If you're gonna have a heroic antagonist, you need to make sure you follow through with it. Without El, Light becomes less interesting. The game of chess ends, but the board is still set, collecting dust. But there are ways a heroic antagonist can feel disconnected from even their own plot. And a good way to show that is by looking at Tim Burton's Batman. A big criticism levied against Batman Returns is that Batman feels like a side character in his own movie. The films are more focused on the villains. Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, they're more the protagonists than the hero because the film follows them very, very closely. Whereas Batman as a character is more removed. He's more of the force opposing the villains. In many ways, this allows Batman to become this mysterious, avenging force. We know what makes the villains tick, but Batman is this enigma, a shadow, and that works for Batman to an extent. By examining how this works in the first film versus the second film, you see a real indication of the limitations of this plot structure. The actions of the first Batman film are entirely driven by Joker and Vicky Vale, the reporter investigating Batman. Batman is a reactionary figure. He doesn't act, he responds. He responds to Vicky investigating Batman and entering Wayne's personal life. He responds to Joker robbing Ace Chemicals. He responds to Joker's schemes. But Batman doesn't initiate action. He responds to others initiating action, and he works against them to prevent them from accomplishing their goals. As a result, the driving action of the story is pushed by either Vicky Vale or the Joker, who take on a more active role in the plot. Batman functions as a secondary antagonist to both Vicky and Joker, with Vicky trying to uncover Batman's story, his past, and Joker being, well, the Joker. He takes over the mob bosses and then runs amok. But as we explore their stories, we learn more about Batman in the process, creating a mystery surrounding Batman. Who is he? Why does he do what he does? And how does he tie in with the Joker? This ties Batman in with the plot to the point where you almost don't notice he's functionally the antagonist to our protagonist Joker's story. But that's not true for Batman Returns, because Batman is barely in the movie and has almost no Bruce Wayne. And more than that, Penguin and Catwoman's stories are not centered on Batman like Vicky Vale's and Joker's are. They're centered on Max Schreck, Christopher Walken's original character, who totally is not Donald Trump from the 80s at all.
You're fired.
As a result, Batman feels disconnected from the main narrative. He's barely tied in. He is a reactionary figure still, but there's no thematic ties between these characters and Batman. He is tertiary. Going back to the start of the video, Marge isn't necessarily connected to the main plot either. She's a newcomer to the story, whose actions throw a monkey wrench into the works of the criminals and Macy. The criminals don't even know Marge exists until the very last third of the film. So why isn't her role as noticeably small as Batman's in Batman Returns? Well, because her actions drive conflict. Aside from Marge getting substantially more screen time than Batman in Batman Returns, we get a sense of what she's doing. She's an active character in the plot, separate from the rest, but she's still acting. She drives her own plot by going out of her way to find different pieces of evidence to solve the mystery. She reevaluates things that she saw and goes back with intentionality to get answers, and goes out of her way to follow up on hunches. But Batman in Batman Returns doesn't really investigate. He records Penguin talking to him about how he's going to play this town like a fiddle and all that, and he uses that to undo the guy. He reacts to Catwoman figuring out that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and then tries to rationalize with her using this evidence they've both discovered kind of at the same time. But he doesn't really do anything beyond that. He's very removed from the conflict. He is purely reactionary and is influenced by the actions taken by our true protagonist. As a result, Batman feels like a reflection of the decisions made by other people, far less of a character in that film. And with his decentralized role, this becomes all the more noticeable and all the more frustrating. We want to see Batman do things, because he does things in that first film. He does investigate Joker, he does investigate the Ace Chemicals being put out, he does push against the characters. But in Returns, not so much.
Meow.
So what have we actually learned here? Ultimately, the hero antagonist, like all other tropes, needs to be handled right. You need to have consideration as to how you incorporate your antagonist into the narrative, tying them into the journey of your actual protagonist, who is also usually the bad guy of the story. The hero antagonist can be a stagnant character or undergo an arc, but you need to always consider the core choice. Why is this character the antagonist? It's not because they're reacting. They can still drive conflict through action. But what value is there making them a force against the protagonist? Perhaps because they're simply more competent than antagonists, right? Stories centered on a hero often involve them being underdogs, overcoming insurmountable odds. What if a hero is fully competent, though? Perhaps even overpowered, extremely skilled, intelligent, able to do what needs to be done to succeed. Elle, for example, is hyper-competent. From the beginning of the story, El has figured out where Kira is located. That gives him a huge edge over Light. Batman is an incredible martial artist and a great detective. He's able to fight Penguin, Joker, Catwoman, Max Schreck, all these guys very easily. Columbo is always ahead and knows more than you think he does. From the start, the conflict there is not whether or not they'll figure it out, you know they will. They're a force, they're a machine. Stories that frame the hero as the antagonist allow a hero who is extremely skilled functionally within the confines of a traditional plot structure, without removing any sense of tension from the plot. Because the tension isn't whether the hero will win or not. It's whether or not the protagonist will get away with it. And we know the hero will succeed. It's how they will succeed. And the tragic inevitability of our protagonist losing. Because we sympathize with the person who has to go up against this machine, this insurmountable force. We have to figure out how the protagonist will get caught, not if they will. Ultimately, it's conflict that drives narrative. So any writer worth their merit needs to always ask, who is at risk of losing what? Center your narrative on a character who will have something to lose, even if what they have to lose is petty.
And for what? For a little bit of money. There's more to life than a little money, you know.